So, when my daughter was in grade 1, Mark Shuttleworth went to space. And as was done in many cases, the school told us to please bring a inside of a toilet roll so that we could let her, they wanted all the kids to create these little rockets. When we went for the parents' evening, the teacher had strung up a piece of string in the classroom and she'd hung all these rockets on that piece of string. And I'll give you no prizes for guessing which of those rockets that you can see there belong to my daughter. And if you guessed the orange one with all the funny squiggly lines on it, you guessed correctly. The teacher took us aside and she said she was really worried about Kate, and Kate had been given all the same resources as the other girls, and she had taken some of the pieces of paper that they'd been given to put down the bottom as rocket fire, and she had squiggled them up and she had stuck them on the sides, and maybe we needed to take Kate for OT and AT and DT and BT and whatever other technology or technical service we could use to put a screwdriver in her ear and adjust her to be like all the other children. I took Katie aside and I asked her what was going on with her rocket. And she explained to me that while he was in space, Mark Shuttleworth had gone on a spacewalk. And to do that, he needed an umbilical cord. And that's what those squiggly lines were. Those were the umbilical cords. She also explained that you're not allowed to do that on your own. So there was more than one umbilical cord for the people who were out there with him. And what had occurred to me was that my daughter had perfectly understood the task. She had perfectly understood what it was that the teacher was trying to teach them. She had listened to the story in detail and picked up on some really key details. And she had replicated those in her rocket. I'm not quite sure why she painted it orange, but that probably has to do with, or has resulted in the fact that she graduated with a fine art degree from Wits last year. So maybe orange was the right color for her. Why do I tell you the story? I tell you the story because, for the most part, schooling has been, for the last 5 or 6 decades, a place where we put all the children in the same class at the same time because they're of the same age. And then we present them with the same work, and we expect them to go through that work at the same pace and write the same exams at the end to show that they're all the same. And what we've learned and what we know and what you as parents would know instinctively is that children are definitely not the same. So how does the Evolve curriculum work? At Evolve, we use a model that was developed at the MIT lab for aeronautical engineering called Crosslinks. And what Crosslinks is a model or a theory of looking at how learning happens, and a system for mapping that learning so that we can prepare a learning program for children that perfectly prepares them to know the things they need to know. And it starts with the item. It starts with the thing we want them to learn. And we arrive at our understanding of that item by asking ourselves the question, what should a child know or be able to do if they can do this thing? So I like to use the examples from English, given that I'm an English teacher by training. We may, for example, be teaching a child about metaphor. And so we would say that the child must know what a metaphor is and be able to identify it in different poems or other literary forms and explain why the poet has used it and what effect it has. The first thing we ask ourselves is, what should the child have learned in order to understand metaphor? And in this case, you won't be able to understand metaphor if you don't understand the concept of comparison. So we expect children to learn comparisons before we begin to teach them metaphors. If I go back to my story of the rocket, what you can very often find in a school is the teacher that receives a group of children has no concept of whether or not the children understand comparison, doesn't check that first, and just launches in teaching metaphor. And any child in the class who doesn't understand comparison is completely lost. Also, the children who've already learned metaphor from their parents or because they had a very good teacher in the primary school, or whatever it is, are completely bored because they've already learned this concept. So I'll get to the Goldilocks zone in a moment, but the concept of this is that you know what you want to teach children, and you know what they need to have learned in order to learn this thing that you want to teach them. The next thing you ask yourself is, are there any related items? And I can go into deep cognitive science about why teaching children related items helps them learn the item better. It's got to do with the neuroconnections in the brain. Cognitive scientists are discovering some really interesting stuff at the moment, neuroscientists as well, about how the brain stores memory and how it processes information. So by giving children, or by giving attention to the related concepts, in this case, the concept might be simile. Simile is also a comparison, but the thing about a related concept is it doesn't need to be known in order for the item to be learned. So you don't need to know about simile in order to learn about metaphor, but it helps you to understand metaphor better if you have learned about simile and vice versa. We move on and then we ask ourselves, and this is where our learner management system comes in, what steps should a child take to learn this thing that we want them to learn? And that's in our learner management system, we create what is called a learning stream. And that learning stream is a process that the child will follow in order to learn this item. So that process might be they have to watch a video, they have to read an explanation about metaphors, they have to participate in a group discussion, possibly their learning activator does a direct talk to them about metaphors, and they may do a simulation or whatever it is, depending on whether they're doing volcanoes or not. Once they've gone through that process of learning, we give them the opportunity to apply what they have learned. And in this instance, I might, for example, give them extracts from 10 different poems. I might give them a piece of a film. They might have an extract from a novel. It could be a conversation between two people. And in that particular set of applications, we will ask them to identify the metaphor and to do those things we say they must do in order to prove that they've understood and mastered this concept. I've used a very important word there. I've spoken about mastery. Mastery is a philosophy that dates back to 1974. And it's an idea that in education that says, in order for a child to progress, we're not just going to accept that they've been exposed to an item. We're going to make sure that they have mastered an understanding of that item. So in this instance, they must be able to recognize and apply the concept of metaphor. I might even have gone so far as to say they need to create their own metaphors. When they think they're ready, they can take the mastery test. They get 3 chances to take that mastery test. And if they don't get it right the first time, then they would probably go back to the learn section, or they would go back to the apply section so that they could try and reanalyze it, reapply it, relearn it. Then they would come back and do their mastery test again. They might do a little bit better this time, but they won't necessarily have reached the point that we need them to reach in order for us to sign off on the fact that they've mastered that item, in which case they go around the loop again, and then they get their 3rd attempt. If they don't get it right on their 3rd attempt, that's when our learning activators intervene. That's when our learning activators get told that this child is struggling with this, and they will then create some new learn process for the child to follow, or new applications for the child to follow, your child, in order to make sure that they can grasp this concept. So in learning these items, we will find that there are multiple streams that a child can follow in order to learn it. We have the core stream, and then when necessary, a learning activator will create an alternative stream for a child to learn that. In the back end, we have an artificial intelligence running, and it's using machine learning to learn everything it can about how your child learns. And for example, in this instance, if we've been collecting data on 1,000 children, and we know that when children make a mistake on this particular item, if they follow a different path of learning, those children who follow that path succeed, then the AI will actually recommend that particular path of learning to your child without the activator having to get involved. If in the learn process your child is asked to watch a video, our AI will know whether they've watched that video. We capture all that information, we put it into our data lake, and we are able to see, okay, so let's try and analyze why this child hasn't mastered this item, and we noticed that they didn't watch the video all the way through, or perhaps they didn't access the notes that we had put on the Learn stream for them. Possibly they haven't spent much time trying the application side, and we can then intervene and say, well, young person, you can't expect to master something if you don't go through the Learn and Apply system. What's incredibly important about this is that when children are in the apply stage, the AI is watching the responses that they are giving, and it's giving immediate feedback to them when they get it right or when they get it wrong. Sometimes in really rich kind of learning situations, it's not the AI doing that. It's in fact their teacher, their activator, who gets the data and has to analyze it and give the feedback. We aim for a very, very quick turnaround on that because we know how important it is for children to get feedback as quickly as possible after having tried something. And again, this is one of the weaknesses of a traditional education system where a child might do an exercise at home, doesn't know while they're doing the exercise whether they're getting it right or wrong, goes back to school, the teacher might mark that exercise on the board without looking at your child's specific book, and then a gap forms and there's no one knowing that that gap has formed. I'll give you another example of this as you may find it in the foundation phase. In grade 1 and grade R, we teach children how to form the letters of the alphabet. The traditional way of doing that is to give them a sheet of paper with different dotted lines on it that they can follow, generally with arrows to show them the direction they need to be going in. They're taught about the tails and the heads, and they're taught how to draw their pen along that page in order to create that letter. If they're given a sheet of the letter A to do, and they have 20 A's to draw or to copy out, they might get 5 of them perfectly right, they might get 5 of them badly wrong, and the other 10 they might be mostly right. They won't know when they're writing that letter A that they're making a mistake. In Evolve Online, we insist on children having iPads from grade R to grade 6, and one of the reasons is there are specific apps that we want to make sure that children have access to in order to learn things like shaping their letters. The particular app that we use for this allows the child to draw the letter on their iPad and immediately notifies them if they're making a mistake or if they're not drawing their letter accurately enough. What's very important about this is it's an adaptive system. So it will start off with a very wide margin of error. And then each time your child successfully draws the letter, the margin of error gets made narrower and narrower so that they become more and more accurate at the drawing of their letters. And they have that instant feedback when they make a mistake so that they don't carry any bad habits through when they do these letters. When they're finished mastering an item, we let them advance to the next item and the whole cycle starts again. We consider this the concept of teaching children to be in the Goldilocks zone. And from that perspective, I refer to a story that many of you would know about this little girl called Goldilocks, gets lost in the woods, finds a little house that belongs to the 3 bears. They've gone out for a walk, as bears do, and she goes into the house, and there are 3 chairs, and the one is too tall, and the one is too narrow, and the other one is just perfect, so she sits on that one. And then there's 3 plates of porridge, and she's hungry, and the one is too hot, and the one is too cold, and the one is just perfect, so she eats that porridge. Happens to be baby bear's porridge every time. And then she climbs up the stairs, and there are beds up there, and you can guess the story. One is too hard, and one is too soft, and one is just perfect. And she falls asleep. And then the 3 bears come back to find this vandal in their house, and they eat her. No, they don't. She manages to jump out the window and escape. But I think if I was the bears, I'd have eaten her. After all, she has eaten their porridge. This concept of the Goldilocks zone is something that astronomers use to describe the position of a planet's distance from the sun, where it would be just perfectly placed so that it's neither too hot nor too cold for the water on that planet to freeze or boil away, knowing that water is critical to life. So we look at the Earth and we know that it's not too close to the sun, nor is it too far from the sun. It is in what we call the Goldilocks zone. And that's the zone that is just perfect for sustaining life. We want your children to be in their Goldilocks zone of learning. And we allow children to advance at a pace that is either faster than average or more deliberate than average. So your child will be following through on learning these items. As they learn them, they move on to the next item. They only move on when they've mastered the item, and if they struggle to master the item, the AI either recommends another path or the learning activator gets involved to ensure that they learn and that they can move forward in good time. We obviously have pacing, and we want to know that children are following a particular schedule and completing their work in a particular pace. And again, if a child is not pacing fast enough, the AI throws up a flag for the learning activator to look into and for the learning activator to intervene. So if a child doesn't log on for 2 or 3 days, or 2 days, or even 1 day, we're going to know that. We probably won't intervene after 1 day, but after 2 days, we're going to start getting concerned and we're going to intervene to find out if there's an issue and whether or not there's a problem that needs to be solved. What does our curriculum look like? We break our curriculum down into phases. So we talk about the reception phase, the reception foundation phase, the intermediate, the senior, and the FET phase. In 2021, we're only going to be going up to grade 9. We only will introduce grade 10 beyond in 2022. So we're going to be doing the foundation, intermediate, and senior phase. Within those phases, we've broken the curriculum down into different subjects. The core curriculum that we offer revolves around numeracy and literacies, because those are the foundations for learning. And we like to say that in the foundation phase, we teach children how to read so that when they get into the intermediate phase, they can use reading to learn. So you have to learn to read in order to read to learn. Numeracy, obviously mathematics, again, the foundation of that is critical, and it's often the case that children have major gaps in their numeracy learning if they're in the intermediate or senior phase, for the very reason of the architecture of a school not being conducive to noticing when gaps start forming in children's understanding of mathematical concepts and practices. Again, that's why you would use an adaptive system. In our case, we do a thorough diagnostic of your child. We plan to start doing those in November. So if parents have signed up their children for next year, we'll start doing the diagnostics now in November so that we can be prepared and put children in appropriate groups for next year. Also, we'll be able to curate some advice to you about things that could be done during the holidays to try and catch up any gaps that might exist. We also do the same with literacy. We do a similar diagnostic with literacy to know exactly where a child's strengths and weaknesses lie, and that can then become the basis. So we find where your child is and we start them from there. That does mean that a child can advance faster through the foundation phase or the intermediate phase and matriculate earlier. It also means a child can take a more deliberate pace and take longer to get there, but get there they will. We also then have digital mastery as a common content throughout. In digital mastery, we will teach things like how to use your iPad, how to take photos, how to take videos, how to be safe online, how to code, how to use robotics. We teach things like social media safety, digital citizenship. The children, the little ones, learn how to be internet awesome. So we have a whole curriculum around digital mastery that the children are doing so that they can be learning how to learn online. And I think this is a critical thing, and it might come up in some of the questions. Just please understand that learning online is significantly different from learning at home or in a school. Learning online requires a certain skill set. We are not going into next year expecting our children to know how to learn online. Indeed, the first 3 to 4 weeks are going to be spent making sure that we teach the children the skills they need to be able to learn online. We then have something called Journeys and Adventures. I'll get back to that in a moment. In the foundation phase and in the intermediate and senior phase, we introduce a subject called Ideas, and that, as you can see, is an acronym, and it's a case of doing instructional and performance-based learning, where the children get taught all the concepts they need to learn about Earth studies, about geography and history and science and economics and art and technology. They learn all of those things as combined, as a single subject and not in silos. We do have links through to the CAPS curriculum, so we are making sure that we tick all the boxes so that if a child does want to reintegrate into a traditional school, we can produce a report for them that allows them to just go straight back into their traditional school. As far as literacies is concerned, we will be introducing additional languages to children. I'll show you a sample schedule in a moment, so you'll get to see more or less how that works. But effectively, they will learn 2 other South African languages apart from the English as the home language. Certainly, we'll be able to choose from a variety there. At the moment, our plans include Afrikaans, isiZulu, and isiXhosa. When we look at it, though, we might introduce some other languages depending on the demand. Finally, we do something called the Golden Thread. We have a set of 15 transferable skills that we teach children. These are the sorts of skills that universities and companies are saying children don't have when they leave school. And it's things like design thinking, it's things like scientific thinking, logical thinking. We talk about temporal thinking. We look into things like persistence, being able to defer reward. You'll see that one of the things we ask the little ones to do is to make their beds in the morning and to take us a picture of that. And that's a question of creating a habit and learning how to create habits and how to create good habits so that you're able to apply those to your learning. What we want to do is we want to teach children how to learn, not what to learn. So it's not important if they know when Simon van der Stel landed in the Cape. They can look that up on Google if it's really necessary. What is important is they know how to understand the impact of that on the colonization of Southern Africa. If I look quickly at this curriculum design around digital mastery for foundation phase, you see that we've got things like using iPads to learn, using the Blackboard Ultra portal. This is a good time for me to tell you that we will be using a cutting-edge learner management system called Blackboard Ultra. It was only released last year. We're very fortunate to be able to use it. It's an extremely expensive learner management system usually, but the universities of AdvTech use Blackboard for their courses and for their course delivery, and as a result, we're benefiting from being an AdvTech school by being able to get extremely good pricing on that. Obviously, that's included in your fees, and as a result, your child has a really engaging learner management system that they can use to learn their goods. What's also important to understand is that we will also teach them how to do that. We will give them instruction on how to use Blackboard Ultra, but it's very logical, very simple. It's got a very user-friendly interface, so it shouldn't take very long to understand it. The other advantage of being an AdvTech school is that we have a head office division that is providing support for the technology and the learner management system. And so we have immediate responses should children have a problem with their passwords, with their learner management system. If they have any technical issues, they can just go straight online or call in, and our tech department will jump in and support them as quickly as possible. We also have formed a strategic relationship with Think Ahead. They're the educational arm of a company called Core Group, who are the primary distributors of Apple in South Africa. And we are working together to ensure that we control the iPads properly. But that being said, any iPad that can use iOS 12 and above is sufficient for this purpose. And so you don't necessarily have to go out and buy a new iPad if you have one of those. We also teach them how to take part in pair and group work. I don't like to use the word group. We talk about collaborative learning, because my experience is that the definition of group work is the group watching someone work, and we certainly don't want that. So what you're seeing now, this very confusing chart on the screen, is just a pictorial depiction of how our curriculum works. As the children master each item and move through their curriculum streams, They can move within the phase and within an age range that we've defined for a particular set of skills. There are also cross-links between these things to ensure that they are best able to see the links between. So, for example, we might teach them the concept of bar graphs or graphing in mathematics. We know that when they do geometry, they're learning about rectangles and that sort of thing. But we also know that they're going to learn that in history, and they're going to learn that in science and English. And what we're not going to do is be inefficient and try and teach them how to do bar graphs in 5 different learning areas, but we just teach it once properly and thoroughly. And then we teach them to apply what they know to the other areas. And that sort of curriculum map is what you as a parent will be able to log in and have a look at. So you should be able to see at any given moment exactly where your child is, what they've mastered, what they're busy doing, and you'll be able to sort of see the profile of your child's progress. And each child will have a completely different profile depending on their strengths and their interests. I said I'd talk about the boxes. In the foundation phase, that's from grade R to grade 3, we will be sending you a box each month. And in that box will be contained the content, the items that your child needs to use to learn whatever it is we're asking them to learn. And in this particular case, we're doing it because we recognize that little ones need more than just a screen. They have to be able to learn tactilely. So inside that box, we might have things like the Montessori 3-part cards. So you might get something like 3-part cards to learn about the content. We're taking children on a journey around South Africa, so we're picking different cities each month, and each box will have that city as a theme. In this case, you're looking at the Cape Town box. It'll have, we're great fans of the top trumps approach. So to give you an idea, in grade 1, we might give the kids a set of top trumps with 2 or 3 facts on it. And in their collaborative live sessions, they would play top trumps with one another in order to learn those facts. In the case of a grade 2, we might not have those, we might have the headings on there, but not the facts, and they would have to look those facts up. The other thing that we're interested in is making sure that children recycle their boxes. So in this case, the box gets turned into an aquarium, and we teach them that because that gives them the opportunity to cut things out and to paste things and to place things. And all of those things are important when it comes to fine motor coordination and gross motor coordination. And we try to give attention to that as well. The other things you might find in the box are these mathematical items that help us to teach the children maths. Things like these board games which teach logic, and then we also will be giving you reward tokens to use to give your children rewards when they have done extremely well. And the system of rewards is something that you will either inherit from us, or you will be encouraged to create your own system of rewards with your child. And the rewards really should be pushing your child to greater and greater independence in learning and in teaching them about economy and teaching them about deferring the gratification. If I move on and answer the question, what would a day in the life of an online learner look like? First of all, if I look at an example of a grade R to 2 timetable, now I just want to say from the beginning, the only sessions that your child needs to be in at a particular time are the so-called synchronous sessions. Synchronous sessions happen when the teacher and the group are all on the call together at the same time. We use a tool called Blackboard Connect for our synchronous sessions. It's part of the Blackboard suite. And in that synchronous session, the teacher might be facilitating a group discussion. They might be doing collaborative learning. They might be doing direct teaching. They might be doing just getting feedback on what happens. And so a typical process follows an hour of synchronous learning at the beginning of the day from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Now that can vary from group to group. Sometimes the group might have their synchronous learning at 9:30 and be expected to do their in-person work on their own in the hour before that. I'm assuming after a synchronous session or after that first push, that first hour, they're going to need a short break. and then they would get on with their asynchronous learning. Asynchronous learning is when your child works at their own pace in their own time offline. And that's where the flexibility lies, because depending on the schedule, depending on what's happening in their day, they might want to start later on those things and end later. They might be having a bad day where they're not feeling well and they don't do the work on that day, but actually do it on a different day. The synchronous sessions will be recorded if they need to be. So if your child misses a synchronous session, they will be able to go on and watch that synchronous session afterwards. What's very cool about Blackboard Ultra is if there are group conversations or discussions where children have to type responses to prompts, the children won't see the prompts that other children or the responses that other children have given until they've put in their own responses. So they can't go in and look at what all the other kids have said and then type their answer based on that. They actually have to give a contribution before they can see the contributions that others have made. And I really love that feature. And as you can see, there's another block of time, usually in a day, where they have a second in-person or live session, synchronous session. In this case, it might be Journeys and Adventures. It could be digital mastery we're teaching them, or their life coach speaks to them. And then at the end of these days, they're having their first additional language literacy blocks. Those you will see are half an hour long. So for this age group, a child would generally work from about 8 o'clock to 1:30 with a couple of breaks in between. Remember, they don't have to work solidly for an hour. That's not very productive. And these tasks that they'll be given to do will also be broken up into subtasks so that they're not just doing the same thing for an hour. I'll jump across. The grade 3 schedule is similar, except that grade 3s are expected to do 2 more hours than a grade R2 is. So the times differ and they generally finish at 2. And then we move on to grade 4 and 6. And by the way, I can make these sample schedules available to you afterwards if you're interested. Just remember, these are indicative. They will vary from group to group, and they will vary depending on your own child's learning style. So one of the things our AI looks at is to see when children are doing work in the morning, are they more productive than when they do work in the afternoon? And they may come back with advice and say, after a couple of months, the AI might flag the fact that your child, when they do maths in the morning, don't do as well at that as when they do maths in the afternoon. And so we're recommending that we swap their asynchronous times around so that they can do it that way. Again, with grade 7 to 9, there's a schedule. As you can see, it sort of goes from 8 till 3. And again, if your child has joined a soccer club and the soccer practice is at 3 o'clock, they might want to work until 2, have some lunch, go to their soccer practice, and then do that last session of theirs at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock so that they can match their own needs and style of learning. You'll notice that there's quite a focus on literacy at the end of the day. If you look at most of these proposed schedules, there's a lot of focus on literacy at the end of the day. And that's because we're expecting them to read a lot. And, you know, it's a good way to end your school day. It's a very powerful way to kind of wind down from your more intense learning. Who teaches your kids? And what about social skills? So we've got 4 groups of people that are involved in the teaching of your children. The first is our core team. That's people like Marie, myself, Roxanne Edwards, who I think might be on the call as well. And if she is, I'll ask her to say hello in a moment. Roxy's our administrator. She's amazing. I'm sure some of you have already connected with her. She's our face of our school and is the one that you would interact with whenever there's a problem. Probably first before you get through to anyone else. We've also got our finance team, we've got our IT support guys and our head of academics, and all of those people work together to make sure the whole school operates smoothly and effectively and efficiently. We have our learning architects. Our learning architects are the ones that are developing the maps and pathways and core learning streams using that MIT model. And they create the base learning program for the children and the base learning assessments. We have our learning activators. Now, our learning activators are the people your child will work with one-on-one and directly in their groups. And those are qualified teachers who are experienced teachers and are able to create learning experiences for your child, to make sure that when they're stuck with something, they can move ahead, to create learning experiences for the group, to make sure that they learn how to work together collaboratively, and to assess the work that they're doing so that they can give feedback on where your child needs to improve. Remember, we use the phrase yet. We don't believe that a child can't learn something. We just believe that sometimes it takes a child longer. And if they're not displaying the ability to master something, it's just not yet. The time will come when they will succeed. And then the last person that your child interacts with on a regular basis is their life coach. They're put into pairs for life coaching, so they have a learning buddy. We're using an AI system to group children. And again, that kicks off in November, when we will be sending questionnaires to you and ask you to send a questionnaire to their teachers. So one of their teachers, so that we can do a full sort of evaluation and put children together in an efficient way where they will complement one another. Just a quick word about the learning activators. We do practice the concept of looping. What that means is that the teacher moves up with the children within a phase. So if a learning activator is with your kids in grade 4, they'll be with your kids again in grade 5, and they'll be with your kids again in grade 6, so that they get to know the children better and better. And there's no gaps that often occur in a traditional school when children are handed over from one teacher to the next, and then the new teacher doesn't really have a deep understanding of what the previous teacher had taught your kids. So that looping concept is something that we're going to be applying quite rigorously to the extent that our staffing allows us. As far as getting to the social interaction component, obviously your child is all alone, learning at home on their own. And that's why we put them into a peer group, so that they can engage with a learning buddy, and they're able to do that through the learner management system without going outside of the safety of that. They don't have to go onto any of the social medias to do that. They can do it directly through our learner management system, so that it can be moderated and monitored and kept safe. Then there's also the group that they work in with their learning activator, and they will work with those same people for most of a year, unless they're advancing very quickly, in which case they might get moved into a more advanced group, or if they're taking a little bit longer, we might move them into a group that's more appropriate to their level. Then each month we will be doing events around the country. Like I mentioned earlier, we're part of Advitech. There are 109 schools in Advitech, and so we have access to 109 properties around the country. We have access to their AstroTurfs and their swimming pools and their jungle gyms and their 3D printers and their robotics, although we have our own robotics. So from that perspective, we do what are called studios, day camps, and academies. A studio is focused on the arts and culture side of things. A academy is focused on things like coding, learning to fly a drone, game design, learning how to design games. And then the day camps are more physically focused. There will be team events, fantastic races, and such like. Your children are entitled to sign up for these events if they want to. I do need to mention that this is not part of the fees. These events are optional. And the fourth thing, so I said there were 4 things. So there's the thing about the being in buddy group. There's the point about being in a group of 10 to 12 kids to learn together, and a lot of collaborative learning that takes place during the synchronous session. There's the academy, studios, and day camps that they can use to build their social skills. And then my advice to parents of homeschoolers and of online schoolers is always, you should get your child to join a sports club or a cultural club so that they can get that exposure in that way, and so that you can cover the issue of the social skills and learning the social skills. If you are in a religious environment yourself, Then, of course, there are all kinds of opportunities and activities with the youth groups that relate to religious environments. Again, I encourage them to learn about spirituality, and I encourage your child, you and your children, to work together on that. So, the 3 words that every audience wants to hear. And in conclusion, I suppose the concluding point here is, how much is this going to cost? So our fees are targeted at a very reasonable rate from our perspective, and I think you will find so too. Our foundation phase is set at 21,200 Rand, all the way through from grade 1 to grade 6. That's what you pay. The senior phase is at 29,900 Rand. FET, we're not sure of yet. It's going to depend on things like the IEB examination fees, but we estimate it to be no more than about the 37,000 Rand range. What that means effectively, the way our system works is you pay an upfront fee of 3,000 Rand to join or to enroll your child at our school. That's actually the first payment of your fees. That's not a non-refundable deposit or anything silly like that. It's the first payment of your fees, and then we take the balance of the fees and we divide that by 10. And so you would be paying somewhere between 1,900 and 2,500 Rand a month after that initial deposit of 3,000 Rand. If you are in fact an Advotech parent listening to us, where your child is already in an Advotech school, please don't go and apply online. You simply have to follow a transfer process to transfer your child from our school, from the current Advotech school into our school. And that's good news for the parents that are signing up for us, because if at any point you want to transfer your child into a mainstream Advotech school or a traditional Advotech school, that's also just a transfer process. So if you do decide that online learning is not suiting your child's temperament, then you can transfer into one of the Advotech schools if you want to. And we will facilitate that. Roxy is the expert at that.